Hello, everybody. We're your hosts, Beth Orr,
And Bridget Querns.
and we want to welcome you to Click Moments and Passionate Pursuits The Unfolding, where intuitively guided conversations are followed with feral faith, enthusiasm, and joy, bringing new insights, inspiration, and perspectives along the way. And we're excited about our topic today. We've been bringing you along in this journey with us as we have really been faithfully following, like, where's this going? How is our relationship continuing to evolve, and what's next? And Bridget, do you want to kind of talk about what happened to us recently?
Yeah. So I don't even remember if we were on Zoom or if I just texted you, but I just got this really powerful nudge that said, "Hey, what would it look like if you just jumped on a plane and went to see Beth in person?" And it
That was a
was
text, by the way.
okay. So I text Beth, who we've known each other all of like 2 months at this point, and say, "Hey, are you free next weekend?" It was really like a week before. I was looking at tickets for the next week. It was so close. And the funny thing was that she was like, "Oh, my entire schedule for that weekend is open," which is really odd because that just doesn't usually happen. And that was all the confirmation I needed. I jumped on and started looking at plane tickets, and to say everything worked out is like the biggest understatement. Everything it's I just finished reading The Alchemist, and it was the universe is constantly conspiring in your favor. It was like, "Oh, here's your tickets. Here's the best rate you could possibly find, even though it's less than a week out. Um, Beth's schedule is open." Just everything just came together so incredibly smoothly. It was like I was along for the ride and the universe was driving at that point. It was so cool. So yeah, so I booked the tickets and uh got myself ready because it was less than a week out from when I was going to go see her. Yeah, and what were you thinking at this point?
Oh, I was thinking, well, I was in the middle of many projects when you text, and the way that your text came across is, I got to do this right now if I'm doing it. And so I was like, looked at my schedule and I was like, yeah. And then I just kept going. And then later on, I was like, wow. Like, like it was just an interesting moment where it was like, so this woman that I know that we have this spiritual connection is going to be the same place that I am, and we have this amplified energy from afar.
Hmm.
Whoa, like, what is the universe doing, that this is the next step and it's happening unexpectedly, although I wouldn't expect it to be any other way,
Hmm.
right? um but it was like, wow, it just intuitively felt right. So I just went with that.
Yeah.
Any kind of questions that I had about it, honestly, were me muscling something up, and I knew that didn't feel right. It was like, absolutely,
Yeah.
of course, you know.
Yeah.
So we met last Friday. It was not this past Friday, but the Friday before, and you were here from Friday late, almost midnight,
Yeah.
to Monday evening.
Hmm.
And today's episode's really going to be about what happened,
Yeah.
which we couldn't have imagined.
Yeah. No, we couldn't have. And I do want to say we very intentionally communicate things. So when odd things came up for me, even though I knew they weren't things that were valid, I still brought them to you and said, "Hey, I'm feeling like, holy crap, I just booked plane tickets. I've never met this person. This could be a terrible mistake. Like, there's danger here." Even though I
Right.
knew that it wasn't valid, but I still brought it up because there's something about really open, honest conversation in a relationship, like building it from the foundational level on, "I know that this isn't valid, but I'm feeling it, so I'm going to express it anyway." So I appreciated that we had that conversation where we were both like, "Yeah, this is a little crazy, but also it's not." And we trust it.
Yeah, one of the things I was talking to somebody here about is this that it's almost like it's uncharted territory because I've never experienced anything like this. And so, but what I do know and what I do trust and what isn't uncharted territory is trusting my intuition, trusting my
Yeah.
instinct, knowing when the universe is guiding me. Like
Hmm.
I know that feeling. I've got some confidence and some faith in that. So I'm also then learning that I don't have to understand it and I don't have to know where it's going. And actually, there's some real beauty in that, but I
Hmm.
appreciate that you acknowledged it because it allowed for us to get that out, bring it to the surface, and then purge it
Yep.
because we were
So
both feeling
important.
it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So what happens is there were some obstacles that I had to overcome. One of them being I had to get to the airport before my partner was home from work. So there was a trusting of, okay, my kids are old enough, like they can handle this for an hour by themselves. They've got this. I'm in communication with them. All of these anxieties that used to prevent me from doing things, I had to greet them and say, you're not welcome to dictate this time. And so I get to the airport and I have prior to this trip, I feel like I don't have it anymore, which is really cool. But prior to this trip, I had a very, very uh, deep fear of flying. So I'm getting to the airport and I'm all nerves. I mean, I'm shaking, my stomach is all, upset. I got through security easily, but I get there and I sit down and we've got a major delay right away. The plane hadn't even left where it was flying from to get to us at this point. So that was like the first thing that happens is this delay. We talked about this in a couple episodes ago about resistance, but it was good resistance that I had to sit in and face in order to in order for this to be the most fruitful experience that it could be. It can't just be smooth sailing. There has to be some resistance that you come up against. And in that resistance, what it does is again, it's God, it's the universe showing you things within yourself that you need to express, that you've been holding or that have been sitting in places where they're not welcome anymore. And that was just another opportunity for me to say, okay, what is this teaching me? What is this catalyst that's greeting me? And how can I use this in a productive way?
mhm,
So I turned on the documentary Stutz on Netflix. And that was
yeah.
I said, all right, this is an opportunity. I've wanted to watch this. I'm just gonna do this. So that was at that point, that was what was going on for me.
Mm, yeah. And for me, it was just um, doing more to fill the time until you got there because originally it was like you were going to get there at like 9:08
Yep.
and then it was like I don't know 11:30 somewhere around 11:30 it was going to be and I was like okay well I'm usually in bed by 9 so I got to get myself up which at least you gave me enough time that I was able to get some coffee in me and be up but I was just excited and it was neat when we actually traversed all of that. I mean, you had your delays,
Yep.
I had my waiting. It was like this really long period of time after it was like all of a sudden it was quick, it was here, and then all of a sudden it was like this long time, right, in that
Yep.
day. But then fast forwarding to the night, where I got to the airport, and there's this there's this. I'm standing out there at the curb, and overhead, she's saying that she's there, and overhead there is an announcement of you cannot be like no standing on the curb. It was like the very thing that I was doing. Don't do this. Like I was literally doing in that moment, and it's on the overhead repeatedly and I'm like laughing because I'm not the only one. Everybody else is
Yeah.
doing
Oh,
it
there was a
too.
whole line of people. Yeah.
Yeah. But when we met, it was like, it truly was like, it was like meeting a family member that you hadn't met ever or in a long time, but had a significant like place within you, right? Like it
Yes.
was like this knowing, like, like I start jumping up and down, I start getting excited, and you start running, and we're just like there hugging, and it's this moment of like, oh my gosh, it's been forever,
Yeah.
right? Which neither one of us understood, but it was just a really spiritual kind wrapping around. It was like almost like the universe loving on both of us, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's what it felt like to me.
Yeah. I had the distinct impression as I'm on my flight from Charlotte to Asheville, this thought came into my head, and it was that exact thought. It's been forever. And I notice it and I'm like, that's really interesting. Hmm. Okay. File that one away. That's fascinating. And yeah, oh my gosh. This is all really uncharted territory because it has never felt that way for me when I've met someone ever.
Mhm,
It
mhm,
was such a unique feeling. And it was like, I'm this whole person, and here's this whole person. But when we're meeting and we're like embracing each other, there's this whole new like being, this whole new presence that's there too. And it was really,
mhm,
yeah, really
mhm,
special. Yeah.
mhm. And I want to say for the listeners, like this, like we're trying to give language to something that doesn't necessarily even fully make sense to us. Like we're just literally sharing the facts of what happened, and then our perception of the experience in words and in an understanding that makes sense to us given what
Mhm.
we know about the world at this point.
Yes.
Right? So, any of you out there who may have some framework to extend this into, given what we're going to share with you, we welcome that.
Yes. Yeah. My theory, and I've written about this in my Soul Nudges blog, is there are experiences in life that tear the fabric of your reality. And you have options when presented with this tear. You can repair it and pretend it never happened. You can leave it and have there just be a hole and just be curious about it. Or you can take this new event or person or energy that's come up and stitch it into the fabric of your reality and make it part of it. And all of
Mhm,
those are completely valid responses. And I'm at the point now where I want the coolest looking quilt that anybody could have. And I am all
mhm,
for it being torn apart and remade every day if that's what it takes. So, who I am today is not who I was yesterday. And it's certainly not who I was a year ago. And it is completely unrecognizable from the person who I was just a few years ago.
yeah.
And I welcome that. So, again, like Beth said, the things that we're talking about, if I would have heard myself saying these things a few years ago, I would have run the other
Mhm,
direction from who I am now.
mhm, mhm,
So if these things land and they sting a little bit, or they're a little bit scary, or whatever the reaction may be, that's completely valid.
mhm.
That's great. Just notice it and be curious. That's all.
Yeah. And one thing before we kind of talk about like where it went from there on Saturday and Sunday, that I think is important just for me to acknowledge is that kind of adding on to this concept that you had of, you weren't 2 years ago who you are today, or even a few months ago,
Yeah.
possibly. Um, I want to acknowledge that like something happened to me, and I know that these versions seem to be going faster. Like I feel like this
Mm,
momentum and this real shift. But I've talked openly about losing my grandmother, who was such a huge source of that relationship, was probably one of the most important relationships in my life, and losing her in November, that month I learned about love at this like bigger level. Like I started to dismantle my understanding of what it meant to love. I started to have this broadening of like familial and spiritual and romantic and all of these different like friends. I started to have all of this like the titles and the roles didn't really matter as much as like welcoming and understanding that there really isn't a hierarchy in it. It's all spiritual, and it's just a different way that you interact here based upon that spiritual love that's been given to you from the universe, right? And so I kind of had started to, when my grandma passed away, notice this loss and this shift, and started to really nurture my relationships and expand this view of love. And then, like 3 months ago, so a month before we met, I meet, somebody that I'm in a relationship with that is so special and is such an amplifier to me and me to her. And we have this really deep relationship that I feel like is from the divine. And I feel like my grandmother is guiding this person in my life. And then a month later, you show up in my life. And so I want to kind of set a stage too, that there's something about really focusing on the frequency of love, focusing on where the divine is trying to give you this higher frequency. This it is trying to align with you in ways and give you like these amazing gifts wrapped around you. And when we accept that in totality, something magical happens to our life. It really does. And we start to be open in ways that we haven't been open before because we see it. Like we see the world differently. We see the potential differently. So I have to say that because it is a piece of this unfolding that's kind of like almost like this environment that set a stage for
Mm.
me to be the version of me that could receive your light in your way, right? I don't know that I could have seen that before.
Yeah, I love that so much. That's such a beautiful concept. This like fertile environment.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And it's really interesting. I'll take that a step further just quickly here, but we're
Yeah.
both in a place where we're really trying to honor and integrate the divine feminine. And that's what the divine feminine asks of us, is to be open, to be fertile, to be um, willing to make space for things that may come in. And again,
Hmm.
I just did the work on that right before we met, just
Hmm.
opened up space for that. It was a fresh, fertile ground. And that is by no mistake, I'm sure.
And I think what that points to is it truly doesn't matter. Distance is in our imagination. In
Mm,
this world, if if I'm putting something into the world and I am a version of me that aligns with somebody else in New York, let's say, or in California or in Portugal or wherever, that distance is an illusion. In the universe, there is no that is not a barrier. That is not like that's just not a thing. And so I think that's when we think about in this lifetime, it's not a barrier, then that kind of is a good segue into it's also not a barrier that if there are past versions of us or future versions of us, that's also not a barrier, right?
yeah. Yeah. So that's a perfect segue into how things unfolded in day two.
Yeah. So night one, we crashed.
Well, literally, there was a crash that we passed on the way. So this is really interesting. There's a gentleman standing there when we meet and we're hugging. And what did he say? Drive safely or have a
He
safe
said,
drive?
Yeah, have a safe drive home." And I go,
Yeah,
"Yeah, thanks." And but it was weird. It was like this slow
yeah.
motion kind of walking past him, and he's like, "Have a safe drive home." And we're like, "Okay, that was weird." And then we're going along and maybe halfway back, possibly 10 minutes into it, there's a crash, which in Asheville is like a rarity. There's never a backup or a traffic jam unless it's for traffic, unless it's for like, there's some sort of construction or something like that. So I'm going to take us right now and keep going. I'm going to tell you the story. So it was interesting because with that crash, what happened was there was a moment where Bridget was like, "Oh my gosh, this is really weird." All of a sudden, there was this recognition that it was Father's Day weekend, and being Father's Day weekend, she had lost her father years
Mm,
ago, and this accident reminded you of that moment. Do you want to
yeah.
take it from here?
Yeah. So we come upon this accident. It's on the opposite side of the road. It's literally the perspective that someone would have had if they were coming upon my father's accident. It would have been on the same side of the road that this accident was on, and the car in front had rolled over. And that was how my father passed, was in a rollover crash. So I see this and like it kind of takes the breath out of me for a moment. But it was a really interesting remembering because it wasn't like it wasn't how I typically feel when I see an accident of that magnitude. Like usually that re-traumatizes. And this was different. This was like, oh, Dad, it's Father's Day weekend. It was like something that almost my dad knew that I would immediately connect to him and remember that he was there in a really odd way. And I know this sounds like it doesn't make any sense. Why would he use that specific thing? Because that's what happened on the last day that I saw him. And I would have immediately remembered. Um, so I just had this recognition of like, oh, this is really interesting because Dad's here. His presence is here.
Yeah, and that got us into a discussion right away about how my grandma had been coming in the few days prior to that, and your dad was on your heart because it was
Hmm.
Father's Day weekend. And so it really got us talking about our ancestors beyond and how the ways that they come to us and what might him coming through at that time, given this weekend in that way, what
Hmm.
might he be trying to say to you? And
Yeah.
I was saying that with my grandmother, what it immediately brought up was my grandmother was like, "I'm right here. I'm right here." Like,
Yeah.
you you like don't think of the last scene of me. Don't think of the very end. Don't have your heart heavy with all of the emotions that come up at the end of somebody's life, because
Yeah.
often whether it's being plucked out unexpectedly like yours was, or the suffering that went into the month before my grandmother left,
Yep.
there's all of these emotions at the end that somehow we give more weight to than their
Mm.
life and their
Mm.
continued influence in our life. And it felt like in that moment our ancestors were colluding and telling us, "We're alive, you guys are alive, go for it."
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. I really got this distinct impression of like all the joy that both of them had. Like I feel them right here, right now, like
yes,
laughing with us, like, ha ha ha, we did it.
yes, they got our attention. It's
Yeah.
not always easy.
Yeah. Yeah.
When
So
you've
that
got
was
this
really neat.
brain, it's hard.
Yeah, that
And
was
so then we
cool.
come home that night, and
Mm,
this light
mhm.
that I have that hasn't been lit for months, I have a bee that hasn't been lit for months, and it's on. It's on its own. Like, we come in, and before I left, it was 3 of the 6 bulbs were on. And when I got home, all 6 of them were on. And so
Yeah.
it felt like with Bridget and Beth, with the bee, that there was some sort of immediately, I had some sort of a nod to the podcast. I had a you guys are together, like, do this. Like, like there was something energetically that was being divinely sanctioned and
Mhm.
encouraged and celebrated, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So we crash. After that night, it was a long day, meeting, and just the anticipation and then the emotion of kind of coming home and seeing that, and then the experience of seeing the lit sign. And so we had a somewhat restless sleep, independent, like we commented the next morning. It was a bit of a restless sleep, but then Saturday was a new day, and we had planned on going out and doing a lot, but we woke up slow because of the morning, and we actually acknowledged that. We said,
Yeah.
I'm kind of feeling like falling into and listening to what the universe wants us to do. And it was really quick that we started to notice little signs that were starting to happen, including
Yeah.
with Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist coming up. And we started to recognize, oh, we were being guided.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was funny because we had this list, or you had created this list of like options and things that we could do for the day. And for whatever reason, when you shared it with me, I could not access it. It was like,
Hmm.
it was like, no, 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 no. You need to listen. You're not following an agenda, your own agenda. Today's
Right.
agenda is listen.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, it did feel like that. And so it was like when we started to really tune into the universe really quickly, what happened is I do these like quantum experiences or intuitive experiences where we really connect to the other side and the energy of what is happening, and we start to just tune in. But then there's a quantum or an intuitive fetch.
Yeah.
And this fetch is when the universe wants to give you a message. And so it's like the what you describe as the cosmic breadcrumbs, right?
Mhm.
Is that what you call it? Cosmic
Yep.
breadcrumbs. And so it's like one thing after another, one message after another. And when you follow this message, it's like a scavenger hunt. You
Yeah.
follow the spiritual scavenger hunt, you follow the next step, and it leads you to messages that you are supposed to know, and usually culminates with a like a big message, right? And so we realized early that's what was happening, and we
Yeah.
were honoring that, right?
Yeah, and I so usually when I talk about cosmic breadcrumbs, it's like today I'll find a breadcrumb and I'll get really excited about it because I know that there's something bigger that it's pointing to. But my experience with this was so much more. It was like loaves of bread after loaves of bread, huge. I like each one its own meal, and they were coming so quickly and so close together. It was like we couldn't speak a word or turn around or anything without there being another whole loaf of bread right there. It was so much more than what I've ever experienced.
Yes. Yeah, it was constant, and it was almost like, I don't know about you, but I mean, there was no way I could have focused on anything other than that
Oh
anyway. It
no.
was like such a presence. It brought you into the present because you when you're interacting with spirit and you know
Hmm.
it, there's nowhere else that you want to be.
Yeah,
It's so
absolutely.
compelling. You're just like, yes. Like there's nothing else. And so it led us to multiple places. Like we lingered that morning, just ended up, staying at home and, making breakfast there, um, kind of processing the different types of things that were coming up. And then we ended up going to the River Arts District, where we started to interact with different artists, and we kept getting messages like through them. We kept getting messages, and it ended up taking us in a rural area to where we were like heading to a town over. And I had these jugs. Now, mind you, I've never brought jugs with me to go get water that comes from some sort of mountaintops experience. And there's a PVC pipe that comes off the side of the mountain somewhere, and it shoots out the water, and people have jugs and they take fresh water, like, natural springs water home. I'm a risk taker, but that sounds pretty risky.
But it was so random because I think you pulled out a jug of water and I said, "Oh, is this natural spring water?" And you're like, "Oh
Yes.
no, it's just tap water that I keep cold." And I'm like, "Are there any natural springs around here?" Who the heck, like, what? That didn't come from me. There's no way. Like, that dropped in, I spoke it, and then it took us to this place that we never could have planned for ourselves.
Mm-mm.
So
No.
we're
And
going to
I
hunt
only
for the
had,
spring.
yeah. So on the way to get to the spring, I realized that we were like 3 miles away from the light center, which is a space that my partner and I had just been to like a month or two before, that was really special to us. And I was like, oh my gosh, this space has this amazing energy, and I feel like we're supposed to go there. And so you immediately were like, yes, let's go. And we're heading there first. So we end up going there, and quickly, given this experience, we had an understanding about what our quantum fetch was for this day,
Mhm.
right? Do you want to kind of talk about your experience, since it was new to you, with what we did and how that felt for you?
Yeah, and I just want to acknowledge that my little spirit animal Chippy just showed up, and every time we're getting close to unfolding something, Chippy shows up. So thank you,
I love
Chippy,
it.
for that message. Um, so we get to the light center, and Beth suggests we do this activity called soul gazing. Now I've heard of this before, but I didn't really know what it entailed. And at first I'm like, this sounds incredibly awkward.
Mhm.
Because I so when I'm having conversations with people, deep conversations, and I'm sure you guys have noticed it if you've spent any time watching our podcast, I gaze in different directions, but it's very hard for me to gaze at someone while I'm cogitating. So this requires that you sit in close proximity. Also, I'm not a close proximity type person. It takes a lot for me to get close to people physically. You sit in close proximity and you gaze into each other's left eye. So we are close together. We're sitting close together. We're gazing eye to eye, which I know a lot of people, when you look in someone in the eyes, it's it's a very revealing experience. So we know that the eyes are the windows to the soul, and specifically the left eye. And so when you're gazing in, not only are you gazing at someone's soul, but you're also allowing yourself to be fully seen. So it is a completely defenseless state if you allow yourself to enter into the experience fully. Yeah.
And yeah, let me say something about it too. We had chosen to, I had thought about doing this because what we recognized right before we got there was
Mm,
we did know each other somewhere else in our lifetimes, not this lifetime, but some other lifetime.
yeah.
And I'll just say that I've only had 2 times in my life where it's come out that I've had and 30 years ago, I would have said, poppycock.
Yes.
Like, this is not possible. All right, just because of my upbringing, that's not my belief system. And so I was really close to it. But I've had 2 times in my life where I've known that I've had a separate life, lived a whole other lifetime. And so what I also know about soul gating, I've only done it 5 times before. And each time that I've done it, what I recognize is this: I tend to go into a place where I'm just open. I don't necessarily see anything. I'm not the person. Usually, other people will have this. I either have this incredibly connected experience, or I go into this space and then I'm an open portal. And it's almost like my eyes show a scene of this other life. Right.
Mhm.
And so that's where I thought this was like, we had talked about, should we go to a psychic? Should we go to somebody who has this kind of experience to understand our previous relationship?
Mhm.
And so what came to me when we went to the light center was, oh, this tool, it intuitively came to me. I hadn't planned on that. This tool is something that you can do, that if you open yourself up to her, she's going to have the capacity to see this other life. So that's what came to me. And why I suggested it was because I knew that was a thing. And I thought that that was something that would maybe work in this moment, right? To understand.
Yeah. Yep. So we start this, and I don't think it took very long before this is so interesting, because usually I do a lot of meditation and visualization, and I always have my eyes closed. But since your eyes are open, you're really focused on this one point. And it was like this point opened up, and I see this scene of, the first thing I see is a woman dressed in this very very old style, like 1700s style white dress that almost looked like something someone would wear around the house, like a nightgown type dress, but it was long sleeve, long all the way down. And she's holding her belly and she's pregnant, like very pregnant. And I just had this very mournful feeling about the scene. So all I see is her standing there. She's being blown by the wind. She's on like this rocky bluff, like this cliff, and she's just standing there holding her belly. And I kind of zoom away from her as though I'm just observing her. So I notice I'm not her. And also Beth is not her. She's just this other character. I don't know, this other soul in this experience. And then I start to feel how I'm feeling. And I'm feeling both mournful and sad, but also very angry, very resentful, really, really negative, angry, hurt emotions. And they're masculine emotions. They had this masculine quality about them. Like the thoughts that I'm thinking as I'm observing her are, I didn't ask for this. I didn't want this. This wasn't my choice. This was forced upon me. I didn't want to be here. This isn't my responsibility. And I'm angry, but not at her. I'm angry at who I perceive to be whomever Beth is at this point. And then all these questions start coming up. Where is she? He, I guess at this point, I realized that we are both masculine in this incarnation. And the questions start coming. Where is he? Why did he leave? Where did he go? What was he thinking? How could he do this? This was so irresponsible. And then it comes to this head of the experience where I see very clearly. I'm asking all these questions and I want to know the answer and I want to be wherever he was. I need to know, I need closure. And all of a sudden I see the face of what I now perceive to be my brother. Like you would see someone's face through the water. If you were looking down on them and they're looking up at you and they're under the water, you can see the light sort of doing this rippling thing that it does when it comes through the surface of the water. And I see that on her face right now as she's sitting in front of me. And I couldn't look anymore. I broke down in tears. It was extremely painful. And I mean, immediately I was crying and I knew that I had lost her in this life and that she had drowned. And I got the answer that I'd been asking. It was almost like who I was then got the answer that I needed to get and sent it forward in time to who I was now. It was such an interesting thing because it created this like healing loop of now you have the answer and now you know now who you were to one another so you can understand the relationship that you have now. So that's my experience of what happened for me.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. I think that's really helpful for like and so like as you're talking, I'm thinking about what I was experiencing that moment and I was just in the room. I was just in the room and I was being incredibly open. I was like making sure that I was soft and that I was just focusing on being open, receptive the whole time. And then all of a sudden, it's like 3 minutes. That's it. Like you're describing
Yeah, it was
something, it's like
fast.
3 minutes. And then all of a sudden, you literally go down. You literally were sitting and you kind of gasp and you start to cry and lean over and you're just crying. And it takes you a moment to be able to tell me like what you saw. And as soon as you said you were my brother and I saw you under the surface of the water and it was like this orange, it was this green blue clear water and I saw you at the surface and your face and your eyes were open and you were just thinking, it made sense immediately. Just you sharing that, everything made sense to me. It was like all of a sudden I was in this recollection with you, and what my soul needed in order to know to heal was being given to me, in that it was like all of a sudden I was there. And I realized in my life all of these ways that sometimes we have fears that are directly related to something that happened to us earlier in our life, and we know where that fear and that belief system came from. But sometimes we have fears that have no root, and so we interpret it to be, oh, there must be something that I've suppressed or denied, and so I don't have access to it. But what this told me was, sometimes we don't have access to it because it wasn't in this lifetime, and we don't have access to previous lifetimes. And all of a sudden, these things that I did to protect myself in this life that I didn't perceive as a protection, I didn't fear it, but I almost planned for it because it
Mm.
was something that was related to something that had happened to me in a past life. So, what I mean is, as an example, if I drowned in this other incarnation as a man, and I was a man who drowned, and I had some connection to this woman who was pregnant, what we realized was is this was my wife. This was my child. And as a father, I went out for one, it felt like I went out for one more trip out, as a fisherman or something, whatever my job was. But I shouldn't have. I
Mhm.
shouldn't have. And I did, probably for good reason, as a provider. But I missed out on being a father to my child, and I was disconnected from this person who loved me and I loved them. So in this life, I've had no children. I remember thinking part of the biggest reason why I didn't have a child was because I said, I don't know, there's just something in me says I can't protect them.
Mm.
Like I'm not going to be there for them. Something like there was just this barrier, right? Number one. Number two, I had this weird thing I did as a kid. Anytime I went to the pool, I wasn't afraid of water, but anytime I went to the pool, I would hold my breath, and I would try to get that breath longer and longer and longer. I had people timing me. At one point, I was at the pool and I had held my breath all the way down the long end underwater and all the way back. And the entire pool was watching because I was going to do this epic thing where I actually had for years been cultivating my breath strength. And I got all the way down and all the way back. And it was like this huge thing. But to me, it was a moment where somehow it was something that I needed to do, which would make sense if I drowned, that at some point my last consciousness was, I'm out of breath. I'm out of breath. I don't have any more underwater. So I'm not afraid of the water, but some part of me knows that there is danger there. And
Mhm.
it's disconnected, but it makes total sense. And this all comes up for me like that in this moment that you share this with me. These weird things that I do, right? And so for me, what it brought up was there are unknown fears that are holding me back. Whereas you have a podcast that is out and going. I had a podcast that hadn't launched yet. And for 3 years, I wanted to do it. And there were known fears that I had faced and were facing, but there were unknown fears also that were seeping into my psyche that I couldn't move forward until I understood and they were exposed.
Mm. Yeah, so Saturday was our day of like ancestral healing, of healing the past so that we can be fully present.
Yes. And all the messages that, we needed to, and that's just an example of one. I
Yeah,
mean, we
there were
can't
so
even
many.
begin to tell you the number of messages that were an ancestral healing, guided, we believe, by, not only the universe, but, our ancestors within the universe that were sharing what needed to be uncovered so that we could be aware of them, so that we could move beyond them very intentionally.
Yeah.
So that was Saturday.
Yeah, and I will share, since my father was with me this whole time, something that I did growing up that connects directly to this is I spent a majority of my time by the water or on the water. So I sailed with my father from the time that I could walk. I went fishing with my father. We were always out on the water. My sport in high school was rowing. I just had to be near the water. And anytime that I think about, even as an adult where I live, if I'm away from a large body of water for a significant period of time, I feel like I'm suffocating. I feel landlocked. There's just something in me that wants to be by the open water. And what I connect that to is that I never would have stopped looking for you if you were my brother and you were lost and I didn't know what happened. I would have never let myself stop wondering and stop looking. So it makes sense that I would want to be near the water, that water is so important to me. And in fact, like water is all over my astrological chart now. I'm a Scorpio with a Cancer rising and a Cancer moon. It's just like water, water, water everywhere. And I don't know if you want to get into this, but I think it's so fascinating that your thing with shorelines, like being away from the shore, but also the meaning of your name and how that connects to it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, there's a lot there. Number one, my sign, I'm a Taurus, so I'm an earth sign. So I'm
Yep.
grounded. I
Grounded.
don't want to
Yeah.
be out in the water. So what Bridget's referencing is I've always liked water, but I didn't know that I had a fear regarding water until about 10 years ago. One of my friends, we were out in their boat in the ocean and they started to go into the open water and we started to get to a point where we couldn't see the shore anymore. And I started to hyperventilate. I started to have a panic attack. And I was like, no, we've got to get to the shoreline. We've got to be able to see the shoreline. And they're like, wait, we're going out to the open ocean. And I was like, no, we're not. I literally was like, you're dropping me off. I can't, like, if I'm going to be here, I have to be able to see the shore. And
Mhm.
so we stayed as far out as we possibly could to where we could see the shore to satisfy. That was a compromise. But that was when I found out that I had this fear and I didn't know where it came from, which leads into the third part of this story. Not only am I grounded as an earth sign, and do I have this misunderstood, or I don't know where it is attached to fear of needing to see the shore, but then I found out 4 years ago. I found out there was a temple in Miami called Temple Beth Or. So it has my name. And one of my colleagues had told me when I was going down to a Liz Gilbert event in Miami, you've got to go to the Temple Beth Or because it has your name. And you've been talking about wanting to know more about Judaism and learn more about world religions. So you should stop. And I said, yeah, I mean, that's like a couple of miles from where I'm going to be. So I stop in, and these people are incredibly generous to me and allow me to come in. I ask if I can come in and sit down at Saturday morning at 9 a.m. in their service. And there's a spot open. And I learned that one seat is for the prophet Elijah. They keep the spot open. And I go sit down and we go around and we say our names because I'm a new person. And when it gets to me, I say, yeah, hi, my name is Beth Orr. And they all start laughing, thinking that I'm kidding. But then they realize I'm serious and they're like, this is really important. And I say, yeah, it is for me too. And we come up with some ideas with why it might be important. But before I leave, I ask the rabbi, I say, just out of curiosity, who is Beth Orr? And she says, oh, it's not a person. Your name means something. And I say, what does it mean? And everything in me is just like leaning in. And she goes, your name means house of light.
I'm
I
in
was just
tears
like,
again.
oh my gosh. Like, I mean, it meant so many things on so many levels, but it meant something to me because my grandmother always said, don't be afraid to shine. Somebody may need your light. But now in this situation, her saying that makes me go, I knew immediately that I was searching for that lighthouse at some point.
Yeah.
That there was a lighthouse somewhere that I was looking for on the point. And throughout my life, my mom would give me lighthouses. Like, I didn't even know why. Like, all these people are talking about lighthouses. And I'm thinking in this moment how, had I been lost at sea and I just needed to find that lighthouse and I couldn't find that lighthouse. And now my name means house of light. It's like it was pointing me, like now I was like, it somehow seemed very reparative in that moment that I had all of this awareness that I could just like let that go. Like
Mm.
my fear around this light kind of dissipated. It just was like, oh, that's a past trauma around shining your light, right?
Mm.
And not being able to see that light. And it just did something to me. It made so much sense.
Yeah. And I think that the culmination of my spiritual awakening was the understanding that I am that which I am searching for. That which I am reaching and searching for is reaching and searching right back at me. Um, so you literally became that which you were searching for.
Yes.
Incredible.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
And that
Uh,
was just like our first full day.
I know. It wasn't even the first full day at that point. That was like
No.
3 o'clock in the afternoon. And
Yeah.
I had met you like 12 hours before or
Yeah.
something. So I don't know if do you have anything else for Saturday, or otherwise let's go into Sunday, because it was really just continued messages around
Yeah.
ancestral healing, you know?
Yeah. Yep.
Then fast forward to the next day on Sunday, we wake up, and again, instead of getting up early in the morning, the universe tells us, which both of us are early morning people who hit the ground
Yeah.
running.
Yeah.
So this is really unusual that we're taking it slow, listening to our bodies. It's been a lot. Um, and that morning we wake up and we decide that we're going to go for a hike and we're going to go have some breakfast, which ends up being brunch. I guess 1 o'clock by the time we ate. And and then it becomes clear that today, really along the way, pretty early, it becomes clear we start asking, well, you knew that we were going to launch we knew we were going to launch our podcast, but there was some barriers around me launching mine. And we really kind of we started to recognize that Sunday was about current blocks, because somehow my block with my podcast was possibly blocking maybe ours even,
Hmm.
right? In some way. I don't know that I had words for that at the time, but it feels like they were interconnected,
Yes. Yeah. Very
right?
much. I very much felt that we couldn't launch until we got yours off the ground for
Yeah.
whatever reason. Yeah. But
Yeah.
it wasn't even a conscious knowing then. Like now I can say that, but then I wouldn't have said that.
Right.
Yeah.
So we've gone to the waterfall. We're on this hike. We get to the waterfall, and beyond the waterfall is another spot where it's like a swimming hole. And, Bridget's kind of doing her thing, kind of swimming, kind of getting in the water a little bit. And I'm kind of off behind this rock. And I've just got my moleskin out and I'm just, riding. I'm just taking this in. But I start to ask myself, based upon recognizing that this is a day of blocks, I talk about, like, you have this emphatic yes, you're going to do it. You have this emphatic no, absolutely not. And then you have this I don't know, which means no for now because you don't have enough information to make a decision. So I'm like going through all my emphatic yeses now. And then I'm kind of going through my emphatic no's. And I'm like, wait, my podcast is an emphatic yes, which there wasn't an I don't know. So I'm like, if it's an emphatic yes, where's the pause?
Mm.
What's coming up in me? Because it's an emphatic yes. And so that kind of switched the dialogue with it. It wasn't even like it wasn't the fear. It wasn't fear. Like, I'd already done the work around the fear of what will people say, imposter syndrome, all that kind of stuff. Like, I was like, I'd done the work around that. I was like, I'm willing to take the risk. Like, whatever people say, like, I have to do it. I kind of had my mind wrapped around Brene Brown's, like, when you're in the arena, there's going to be always people talking. And if they're not in the arena, I'm just not curious about what they have to say. Like, I'm not going to give it any weight. Right. So I was there with that. But then some other things started to come up. Do you remember that moment and kind of what was coming up for me? I'm
Um,
pulling it up.
yeah, so I'm picturing as you're writing and I'm sitting there with my legs in the water, these three people come up behind us And I'm just sort of noticing their conversation and what's happening with them. And they're all saying to each other, are you going to do it? No, I'm not getting in. No, I don't want to get, nah, I'm not going to do it. So they're all saying that they're not going to get into this water or to go off this natural water slide there. And then the couple steps a little bit closer to the water. And I think you said really quick, you were
right.
like, be careful, it's really slippery there. And then boom, they go
Boom.
down and they're both in the water next to me. And I'm giggling to myself, but the gentleman who was standing behind them said something. Did you write down what he said? What he
Oh
said was
gosh.
like, it was something
Oh,
directly
oh, I got it.
related. Okay.
He said, I didn't see that coming, but I watched it unfold.
Right. Yep. Chills all over my body when he says this. And I'm like, are you serious? What? Like he just used
Yeah.
our word. Like he just nodded. Like again, universe says, you're going to use this word right now. And it's going to be loud enough that Bridget hears you and then goes over to Beth and says, do you hear what he just said? I
Right.
didn't see that coming, but I watched it unfold. And that's, yes, exactly.
Right.
But also this like allegory is shaping up of exactly what's happening with the podcast, with your podcast. These two people are stepping towards this edge and then bam, they're in it, like fully in it. And at that point they say to each other, well, we might as well get in because we're already wet.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that's how I'm feeling in this moment. I'm like, yeah, like we're in this, we're committed, we're going all the way in.
Yes.
What else would we do? There is no other choice. Like, yeah, the universe swept us off our feet.
Yes. That's right. That's right. And it is funny, like as soon as I heard that, I realized for me what happened was is I realized I didn't want to do it alone.
Mm.
That was my reservation. And because I'm so independent, it wasn't on my radar. Like it did something within me to like actually say, you don't want to do this alone. Right. And so working with you in this podcast and putting out our podcasts felt right and felt good because I wasn't doing it alone, but
Mm.
it still felt like I was alone in my podcast. Right. I was like, oh gosh, I'm going to be doing that alone. And who, like, if we say something and it's out there, we've got each other's back. But if I say something out there and there's criticism or anything, I'm like, oh gosh, like and then I realized, is this true? Am I alone?
Mm.
And I was like, no, I have my partner, I have my family, I have you, I have my dear friends that will have my back,
Mhm.
and I'm not in this alone. I suddenly, all of a sudden, it just was like, oh, wow, okay. But that was rattling around in there somewhere.
Mm.
That this lie that I was telling myself. And that kind of shifted it for me. I was like, okay, I can do this. I'll figure it out. Everything's figure outable. I'll do it one step at a time, right? And so that really was my big takeaway, I think, from that day was to recognize that what I was telling myself wasn't true and I could walk forward. And it was an emphatic yes. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And this conversation we're having right now, recording, was really my last kind of reservation, which was I'm fully out there at this point. I am fully committed. I am revealing the wholeness of this self that I am becoming. Um, I'm not Bridget. I'm Bridgeting. And
Yeah.
every day it looks a little different, and every day there's more tears in that fabric. And there are going to be some people who look at the fabric of my reality and go, who the heck are you? You're not the same Bridget I knew. Or, where did you get these beliefs or these ideas from? That's not what you would have said to me a year ago or 2 years ago. And there's even some fear. Like there are some people who have witnessed the transformation that I'm undergoing and have met it with fear and have sent me mean messages that were, I think, intended not to be hurtful, but could have been taken in a hurtful way. And honestly, the first reaction I had when I saw them was, oh, yeah, I'm doing it right. I'm doing it right.
Mm,
Because I'm not for everyone, and my journey is not their journey. It's not for them, it's for me. And so
mhm,
having this conversation where we're talking about all of these concepts that aren't going to resonate with everyone, that was my last hang up. That was the last hurdle. It was the last, like I
mhm,
said, the last big toe that was stuck in the woo closet is fully out
mhm.
now. Like I am presenting
Yeah.
my full self, my whole complete self to the world, and feeling really good about it at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's as we, kind of look at this, I look at this unfolding for this episode as kind of three parts. And I feel like we've gone through the past and then we went through the current. And then what you're talking about now is kind of that Monday of we're both really committed to being our authentic self. That's what we do for a living. That's one of the things that I'm really happy about with us is that we met each other not as competitors, but we met each
Mhm.
other as people who we saw that we were on a shared mission and a shared commitment to live our authentic life. There is fear and there is uncertainty that goes into walking in a way that you're just bravely yourself into the world. Like you're
Mhm.
just like, this is me. And that will continue to have a lot of those feelings. We're relatively new on, and I think that's part of the unfolding is to show that we're like fawns with our little knees knocking, but we're standing up, you know.
Yep.
Um, but I feel like that's really important is for people to be able to identify. I recognize that sometimes I can come across as incredibly confident and I am confident. I do believe that this is the right direction, but that confidence doesn't mean that I don't have fears or uncertainty or that there aren't things that can get in my way and make things take longer than maybe what they would for some people.
Mm.
But what I feel like is just that on Monday, that's what we focused on was is being our authentic selves, putting it out there, and all of our work and effort went to editing, getting everything up, all the details, and launching. And that moment of launch when we launched was such an exciting moment. And we started to get, there's always this moment where it goes really smooth, but then it like it doesn't go smooth. Like so we had this moment where it was like blocks, 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 blocks. And then all of a sudden we lit a candle and it changed.
Yep.
And it just became smooth and we were able to launch. And it was just such a glorious moment. Like, oh my gosh, we did it. It's out there.
Yeah.
It's out there. And for me, that was a 3-year culmination. For you, you've already got this other podcast going. But to launch a podcast, which had been on my heart and felt like a spiritual invitation, and I had
Mhm.
finally opened it and gotten to the event, it was like, yes,
Yeah. Yeah. I
you
don't know
know,
if there's much else to be said about that. But we did say, I think it was on Sunday that we're like, maybe this is an invitation, and we're like unfolding the invitation and we're accepting. That's what it feels like. It feels like we were invited to this, and we didn't plan it. That's why it feels so resonant, that idea of an invitation. Like we didn't plan this. This is an event that we have accepted an invitation for. And it's like the event couldn't take place without us, but it would have taken place without us if we hadn't accepted. It's a really interesting paradox.
mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. So in that moment, I will say I had this moment of, oh, we didn't quite like you were going to be flying out in a couple of hours. We had to leave, and I was like, I didn't get mine done though. I didn't get my podcast out, and we were going to go to a couple of shops and do some things before you left, and you were so determined that no, we're getting your podcast out too. And I'm like, what? Like, are you sure we have time? And you're like, yes. Are you ready? Like, do you have your episode ready? Yes, I have my episode ready. Do you like, and all of a sudden it was like the lack of intro, outro. Like I had given the intro, outro music that I was going to use to our podcast. So I didn't have an intro, outro that was separate. But I had my cover photo and I had my episode, and I was like, something within me had always said, it's not supposed to be perfect when it starts.
Hmm.
Some of what you're doing is allowing space to show the imperfection, because there's some people who need to see that, given something that they're working on. And so I was like, okay, that's my invitation, is to just step into that and breathe into that. But you were so gracious to help me. And so when we launched mine, I was like, oh my God, I just launched 2 podcasts in the same day. I mean, it's so extra of me. Oh my gosh. It was just this beautiful moment where, I mean, my hands are sweating right now thinking about it. Like, that meant so much to me, right? And again, it goes to that I'm not alone. Like, you had my
Yeah.
back, right? It was just a really important moment, and I thank you for that.
Yeah. It's funny hearing you say that, because that like, to me, that was exactly what we were doing that day. Like, there was no question in my mind that was what we were
Mhm.
doing. I was like, I'm here. Like, I'm here for this. Like, tell me what do you need? What can I do? Because I'm here for this. Like, this is happening. There is no question in my mind that we are doing this today, and it is happening.
Yeah.
So again, I was just, in that moment, I was just responding to what I felt was the absolute right thing.
As a brother would.
Right? Yeah.
Since we decided that's what our relationship was. So um yeah, so I feel like that's like we can kind of wrap it up. I feel like, like that was
Yeah.
our first meeting weekend, and it was very affirming that
Mm,
everything that we were moving towards definitely had, like, we had this connection, but then we understood now what that connection historically came from. But then it also makes sense that in these, incarnations that we have now, that we're each other's spiritual family. Like, we're
yeah.
part of each other's spiritual family. And I'm still rather new to spiritual families as a concept, but it completely makes sense to me that we have these souls, for those people that are maybe new to the concept, that we have these souls that are signed up to work together in conjunction with each other for our higher collective consciousness and a purpose, right?
Mhm.
And in different incarnations, we find each other. I don't know that we always find each other and there's a recognition,
Right.
but we mean something to each other in a lifetime, and it feels really intense. And I
Mhm.
think probably other people can have identify with those intense relationships, that are really meaningful beyond what our understanding or words can give it.
Yeah, I love that you use the word intense, because we tend to want to color intensity in terms of positive or negative or black or white. And if we were to take away that layer and just look at it in terms of intensity, you can have an intense relationship that brings up a lot of emotion that drives you forward in progress or in evolution. And it could be very, very, very positive, or it could be very, very, very negative as you may perceive it. But its purpose is still the same. It's
Hmm.
an intense relationship that advances your spiritual, your soul's evolution. So yeah, I just wanted to add that there. For some reason it felt important.
Yeah, and I do think it's really important. I had gotten feedback from somebody that for us to be mindful of terms and
Mm,
sharing, and I think that's so important, to not only share how we're using terms, but because these are terms that are evolving even in our society now, people can have a different understanding of what these different terms mean because they're still so ambiguous, or they're still being like massaged into a concept, right?
Mhm.
Worked into a concept. So yeah, I appreciate that. I think it's good to keep that dialogue going, and to try to clarify as much as we can given what our understanding of something is. So
Right. And my understanding tomorrow will be different than it is today, and I invite that.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, definitely. So as we wrap up, I'll just end with, I am so excited now that we've met. It feels like we're the next right step for us is really having some candid conversations, and getting into the depth of some of the concepts that we've been talking about behind the scenes, that seems to be gaining some momentum in our
Mhm.
individual lives, that I think would be really interesting for people to consider in their own life, how these concepts may be playing out or could unfold for them also.
Yeah, and I would just love to put out an invitation to listeners or viewers to please, if you have questions or ideas that this sparked for you, send us a message, leave us a comment. We would love to really get into unfolding these things with you as a community.
Hmm.
So please feel invited to bring that forward. That would be wonderful. And a
Yeah, and
special
we
thing. Oh yes, go ahead.
yeah, go ahead. Oh, we have a couple of topics that we're tossing around for the next episode, and so we might send it out as a poll. But we're definitely going to be starting to send out polls to folks to get ideas, because we're going to hit all these topics. So if
Mhm.
you've got something on your heart that you want us to talk about related to some of these things, we'd like to hit those topics according to your desire also. So
Yeah. Yes. A special thanks to Asheville artist Melissa Moss for our cover art. You can learn more about Melissa and her work at melissamossart.com. That's spelled Melissamoss art.com. And thanks to Cloud Cult for our podcast music from their song, There's So Much Energy in Us. You can learn more about Cloud Cult at cloudcult.com, CLOUDCULT.com. And thank you for listening. And until next time, friends, peace, love, and light.